anxious to get going because we have a second part of our program. I'm Sally Monastery, and I am the president of the Scripps Fine Arts Foundation, and I would like to welcome you all to our Ceramics Invitational Lecture. And I would like to introduce Erin, Curtis, who is the director of the Ruth Williamson Gallery, and she will introduce Nancy, our speaker.
Thank you. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. As Sally said, my name is Erin Curtis. I am the Gabrielle Jungels-Winkler Director of the Ruth Chandler Williamson Gallery, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's lecture. Before we dive in, I just want to share a little bit of gratitude and some brief announcements that I have as well. First, I'd like to thank all of you, our friends at the Scripps Fine Arts Foundation, for partnering with the Williamson Gallery on this program. And this is actually the third and final program that we've co-presented this year. And I'm especially grateful to board president Sally Monastery. I was working on the last name with her in advance. And board member Catherine McIntosh for their partnership. Additionally, I'm grateful to our friends at the Clark Humanities Museum, including Director Anne Harley and Academic Administrative Assistant Claremont, for very graciously providing us a space for today's program. As you will see, if you have gone to the exhibition or will be joining us afterward to view it, it is filled to the brim with really incredible ceramic artwork, and we just couldn't fit everyone in there today. I'd also like to acknowledge the Scripps College events staff and the Williamson Gallery staff and thank them for their hard work, which is what makes these programs possible. This is our final program that's being presented in conjunction with the 80th Scripps College Ceramic Annual, which is entitled In the Hands of the Collector, the Fred Marer and Forrest L Merrill collections, and is on view at the Williamson Gallery. I think you're all aware, but I did want to underscore the invitation to stay after this program to view the show. Nancy's prepared a very wonderful educational guide to this space for anyone who wants to utilize that. And if you can't join us today, the show is on view through April 6th. I also wanted to invite you while you are here to enjoy the exhibition that's on display at the Clark Humanities Museum. This is the work of one of our Williamson Gallery summer interns, Clark Lewis, who is a junior at Pitzer College. And this was curated from the Scripps College collections. It's something of a meditation on the use of Black in Japanese prints, so do take a look before you head over to the gallery. Finally, keep an eye on our website, which is rcwg.scripscollege.edu for future programs and exhibitions, and you can also sign up for our mailing list there to keep apprised of what's happening at the gallery. So on to today's program. I'm very fortunate to welcome Nancy M. Servis. Nancy has been a leader in the greater San Francisco Bay Area ceramics community for nearly 30 years. As a recognized author, curator, and educator, as well as a historian specializing in Northern California ceramics, she has curated insightful exhibitions for galleries and museums and devised college curricula on the topic of California clay. She's a guest curator for the 80th Scripps College Ceramic Annual, for which she developed a thoughtful and in-depth exploration of the two major California collectors that she's going to tell you about today. Her prolific writing is featured in periodicals such as Craft Quarterly, Ceramics, Art and Perception, Noya, I think it's Ceramic? I got it. Studio Potter, Ceramics Monthly, and the Ensika Journal. She's also the author of several artist biographies and exhibition catalogs. In 2014, Nancy was the Gentel critic and writer-in-residence at the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts in Helena, Montana. And she is also a member of the International Academy of Ceramics located in Switzerland. Presently, Nancy is completing her book on the history of Northern California ceramics. So please do join me in welcoming Nancy Servis.
Wow, it's nice to see everybody who's, that is here today. Welcome. And I just want to say, again, thank you to the Scripps Fine Arts Foundation for supporting this show and this lecture. More than anything, I hope you will come away with an excitement and enthusiasm and a joy for the history of Northern California ceramics and the pieces that are on display. As I told a few people earlier, that this is a show about joy. This is a show about celebrating ceramics and how collectors themselves take joy in what they are collecting. But also, it was a joy for me to do this exhibition. I've known of the Marer collection for 20 years, and when I was teaching the history of ceramics at California College of the Arts, I would often show pieces out of the collection. So I felt like a kid in a candy shop when I was down in the basement looking at all these wonderful pieces that I knew from books, but also making many great discoveries. I can't quite see the screen, but I'll kind of do my best here. So this show does celebrate California ceramics as seen through the vision of two legendary collectors, Fred Marer of Southern California and Forrest L. Merrill of Northern California. They each offer a unique insight into their holdings while also finding commonality with select artists. So a good portion of their collections included unique artists, but there are several where there was overlap, and that's a historical note to take about that. In the gallery, we'll see exciting vessels with scintillating glazes, walls of bowls punctured, carved, and then designed like fabric. And this all is tracing the evolution of the vessel idiom into sculpture. And this is a welcome to the dynamic era of 20th century ceramics, especially in California, and captured by these two collectors. These 4 images on this first page capsulize some of that diversity that we'll see. On the far left is a basket. It's called a basket. It's made of clay, but it's a basket by June Kaneko from 1971. Then we have a bird form by Peter Volkes, then a beautiful vessel by Beatrice Wood, and then a sculpture by the Northern California artist Liza Riddle. These images provide an introduction to the variety of pieces in the show, illustrating the innovation indicative of the mid to late century, 20th century and beyond, while also paying homage to the traditional vessel. Okay, there we go. But this is a slide of a place in England. And the reason I'm showing this is because the curatorial mindset of the man who lived here was very influential to me as a young college student. This show's premise has roots in Cambridge, England, where, as a budding art historian in the late 1970s, I visited the former home and gallery of Jim and Helen Eade, known as Kettle's Yard. They lived among art of their contemporaries and welcomed university students to encounter objects of the Eade's affection, like paintings, ceramics, period furniture, and nature. Everything was equally valued and not valorized, a term used by British ceramic artist Edmund Duval in an idealized or sacred museum space. And that was a really important component to Kettle's Yard. And on the right, you see an installation with furniture, but then you'll also see on that table a ceramic piece by Hans Koper, which also is in the Scripps collection and on view. Similarly, both Fred Marer and Forrest L. Merrill sought an accessible path for their collections, making them readily available through open storage, as with the Marer collection, or frequent exhibitions in unexpected venues, as with the Merrill collection, who lends work to the San Francisco International Airport, which is an accredited museum. What better way to expose people to the benefits of art than in one of the busiest travel centers in the world? So if you're ever flying out in and out of San Francisco, there are many art pieces on view, but there are also professional gallery-style installations. And Forrest has done many shows there. So this is a photograph of Fred in front of part of his collection, and the quote above him says, "I bought what I liked practically always from people I liked," which is a very important guideline if you're a collector. For him, not every collector uses that, but for him and even for Forrest Merrill, they liked the artists that they collected. On the left, that kind of rounded standing form is by Kozo Kuwashima of 1963, and the right is by Miyanaga Tozan. And you'll see both of those are on the shelving right behind Fred, and that's why I wanted to include them in the show and also in this lecture. Here you can see this piece. And then here's the other one. Also in this image, on the bottom shelf on the left, just directly next to Fred's arm, is a small Peter Voulkos piece, which was, I really thought about including that in the show. So you'll see that collectors really like to be with their works, and to separate them from their works sometimes can be a challenge for them. They don't want to lose touch with them. Just before we talk about this other slide, I do want to mention the importance of the Fred Mayer collection. It is it's the heart and soul of the ceramic collection at Scripps. And Fred was a man of modest means as a math professor at the Los Angeles City College, and one condition for purchase was affordability. He didn't have the bankroll of a major investor, and so some people think that he perhaps missed out on some artists of the period, but it really doesn't matter, because that was his condition, and it really helped to form his collection. So consequently, there are some amazing, very personal pieces in the collection. He quickly developed these relationships with many artists, and often by visiting the regional colleges, universities, exhibitions, and even kiln openings. And that was a collecting tactic, I would say. If you go to the kiln opening and you can see what's coming out and before anyone else. And so that both Forrest, Merrill, and Fred did that. Consequently, his collection is recognized as a first-person account of the development of what is known as the Otis Group. This informal name describes artists who were in the orbit of Peter Voulkos, who established the ceramics department there when it was called the Los Angeles Institute of Art, though many artists preferred the original name Otis, to which it returned. And some of those artists would be Billy Al Bankston, Michael Fremkes, John Mason, Mac McLean, Ken Price, Jerry Rothman, Paul Soldner, and Henry Takamoto. And that is a legendary time and period, and Fred was on the front row seat for all of that. While the Mayer collection has extensive holdings by these artists, especially their sculptural work, Fred Mayer continued to collect vessel pieces outside of the realm of California. So he has a lovely collection of Mata Ortiz vessels that are quite wonderful. When you take the time to focus on an artist's work, you have the liberty to go where they've been, and that's the kind of journey that interests me very much. And that is a quote by Forrest Merrill, and I think it really depicts his philosophy and approach to his collecting. In this picture, he's meeting with the artist Marguerite Wildenhain, and her work is on either side of that black and white image. Forrest has been a collector since he was a young man at the Herbert Hoover High School in nearby Glendale. His art teacher there, Gladys Merrick, inspired his passion for art, which lasted throughout his life, and is actually quite meaningful to him. I spent a lot of time talking with him about the collection and the origin of his collecting passion. And as lovely and wonderful and polite as he is, he's also very reserved. So it took some time to get some of these details and that he shared with me. He first collected a Glenn Lukens glass piece, not ceramic, which spawned a lifetime of collecting works in a variety of media: art glass, wood, textiles, and of course ceramics. His awareness of the Scripps Ceramic Annual when he was growing up, and this annual started in 1945, was inspirational to him, and he was thrilled to be asked to be a part of the 80th. Forrest's extensive ceramic collection includes not only objects, the vessel idiom being his initial and ongoing interest. He also collects supportive material like Marguerite Wildenhain's potter's wheel and personal ephemera. And he has one of the most extensive collections of her work and life. And just these two pieces are two of several. And Marguerite Wildenhain, there are two pieces of her work in the show, was a true ambassador of clay throughout her long life. She established the studio school called Pond Farm just outside of Guerneville, California, and Guerneville is pretty close to the coast. I visited Guerneville, I visited Pond Farm 2 years ago after talking about Marguerite Wildenhain for decades. And I was so inspired because it wasn't like I could drive down a long driveway and find her studio at the end of the driveway. It was, no, I have to drive through Armstrong Redwoods, get through Armstrong Redwoods, stop, and then drive up a rather treacherous dirt road up a mountain. And then you stop and there's Pond Farm. And this was 2022. Imagine doing this in 1940 or 1950. I was so inspired by her determination and gained a lot of respect for what she accomplished. The students who went to Pond Farm, she did a lot of workshops there. She worked very briefly at California College of the Arts and Crafts. It didn't last for long. She just developed this workshop in school up outside of Guerneville. And for decades, potters would go there and they became known as a group of pond farmers. So there are all these exhibitions about the influence of Marguerite Wildenhain. Her story is a compelling one, and the more you dig into it, the more profound it becomes. She was one of the few women artists to study ceramics at the Bauhaus in Germany. Very proficient, very disciplined. With the rise of Nazism, she came to California and briefly taught at CCA, and then continued on at Pond Farm. She also traveled the world as I said, an ambassador. And she, and along with Tony Prieto, were featured in many workshops around the world to talk about the role of clay and ceramics. The personal nature of collecting is the text for this exhibition, and I just want to touch a little bit on what that means. Since Fred is no longer with us, I wanted to include this piece that shows him with his second wife, Estelle. That's on the left there. And then the other picture is of me with Forrest in his library. Both men collected work of their time, mostly. There are always exceptions, but it's because what was happening in their life, in their time. And Forrest likes to joke about how he was buying mid-century modern ceramics in the mid-century. And he wasn't paying exorbitant prices that you're getting now. He truly is inspired by friendships, and Forrest in particular, but also Fred collected in depth, which is very valuable when you're trying to understand an artist's development. So these types of approaches, the personal nature, the collecting of ephemera, adds to the ceramic narrative, and it brings great contextualization to the story of clay and to the biographies of these artists. So when you go into the gallery, this is what you will see. This is our entry piece. And this piece, together there are two works here, and they summarize visually the exceptionalism of many of the works that you're going to see. They're both daring pieces, which is really, I think, a hallmark of some West Coast ceramics. The fireplace surround, the brilliant orange fireplace surround, is from the 1930s. Which is really a shocking kind of realization. And it's by the artist Susie Singer, who came to California in the 1940s from Austria. And she received a Fine Arts Foundation grant to create some sculpture for the Scripps collection, and they are also in the basement. You can see them. But these are, I think, 7 vignettes of Austrian fairy tales. We're still trying to figure out all of the narrative for those. But above that is a platter by the artist Jun Kaneko, who came to California in 1963 from Japan. And he came at the invitation of Jerry Rothman, but had no plan, had no money, and didn't speak any English. So that's a tough situation to be in. But he became friends right away with Fred Marer. And that's a story I'll be telling you a little bit about later, because it helps to chart a path of creativity that continues today. So in the show, there are several highlights that you'll want to keep in mind when you go over to see it. The idea of collecting in depth. There are several works by artists that are arranged together, and you'll be able to see them very easily. And an example of that would be Laura Andreessen or James Lavera. But other artists who are collected in depth, their works are threaded through the exhibition. So there are 4 pieces by Peter Volkes, but you'll need to kind of track them down as you go. So you'll find unique pieces like this Susie Singer piece and Hallmark pieces. Maybe you'll see some by Peter Volkes that are quite wonderful. And then the other thing we'll be seeing are pieces by Scripps College artists. And Forrest Merrill, because he grew up in Glendale, was very interested in that. These 3 seemingly modest pieces are the first works collected. On the left is a teapot by Laura Andreessen that was collected by Fred Marer. And this was always kind of an interesting starting point to somebody whose path just kept going and expanded. In the center is a glass piece, not a ceramic piece, by Glenn Lukens. And this is the actual piece. It's called a slump glass piece because it was molded over kind of a form by Glenn Lukens. And he bought that as a teenager and was inspired by the woman who made the next piece, Gladys Merrick, his high school teacher. There's also in the exhibition an intention to provide works by Scripps students. And Betty Davenport Ford's Wild Goat is in the collection and on view, and then Nina DeCreft Ward's is also there. And these are 2 women who went to Scripps, graduated from Scripps, and had a life beyond as educators, artists, and teachers. And again, Forrest feels it's very important to have that thread of consistency and the thread of history that's there. We also see in the center image 2 works by Harrison McIntosh, and a favorite of mine for sure, and an artist who's known for his mid-century modern ceramics, so refined, so eloquent. What I love about Harrison and his work is he was born in Vallejo and then came down to Southern California, so he meets kind of my criteria of interest for quite... and he also studied with Marguerite Wildenhain as a pond farmer. So I mentioned artists collecting in depth, and here are some that you'll see when you go over to the show if you haven't seen it already. There's a separate pedestal that has these 5 pieces on the lower right-hand slide by Laura Andreessen, and then there's a close-up of one of those on the left, and then behind Laura Andreessen's selection is a grouping of Gertrude and Otto Natzler. And Laura Andreessen was a really important figure in establishing fine art pottery on the West Coast as an educator. That's the role, that was the pathway that women had to take. They couldn't necessarily get a degree in ceramics in a studio. But she developed incredible forms, great glazing, she married them together in a way that is just so thorough and refined. And again, representation in both the Marer and Merrill collection, and Forrest has quite a few pieces of hers. Gertrude and Otto Natzler are 2 Austrian ceramicists who came to the U.S. fleeing the Nazi occupation. And what's really wonderful about this early stage of ceramic history is many artists, and Netzler's included, harvested their what's called raw clay or live clay. They weren't going to a ceramic store and picking up the latest mix. So that's a really interesting part of the story. And in my book, I talk about the geology of California and how the abundance of clay really made a big difference in, I think, the availability of artistic expression. And of course, there's the work of Peter Voulkos. And many people know Peter Voulkos' work for his very strong forms, his stacks. But these are at the beginning a little bit. And this beautiful, beautiful rice bottle is from the Merrill collection. And what's interesting about Voulkos is that normally a rice bottle is a 8-inch tall vessel. But it's thought that when Peter Voulkos was he was from Montana, when he was looking at art magazines, the scale of the images, the scale of the pieces and the images really kind of got lost. And so in his mind, a rice bottle, which maybe in reality was 8 inches tall, in his mind, it became 14, 15. And so this beautiful, beautiful rice bottle is in the show, and it's incised. And the other thing about Voulkos is he was a really strong person, physically strong. And so he learned to throw huge amounts of clay that most people couldn't do. He starts to kind of deconstruct the vessel and create forms or build with slabs. And these early pieces are really a jewel for both. Scripps has many works of Voulkos's, and Forrest also does, but particularly with Voulkos, when you're looking at the works of his in the Scripps collection, you get a sense of the wayfinding and the development and the experimentation that artists do when they're embarking on their career. James Lavera is from Northern California. He is a true Northern Californian. He didn't really bounce back and forth between Southern California. And he is dedicated to the vessel idiom for sure. These beautiful kind of Asian-inspired forms. He was adept at working in stoneware and porcelain, and he was a master of chemistry. So he created just remarkable glazes, and he's a real favorite of mine, like I said. And again, Forrest also has many of his works. And someone asked me if I had a favorite artist. That's a really hard question. But if I really had to answer it, I would say James is there. I mean, he was a lovely man, and just created these forms. And you have the delicacy and the beauty and the refinement of these very fine, shiny glazes, but then he used lava glazes, these crusty, emotional pieces. And so he's one of our Northern California people that I will always admire. In the Mayer collection, not at all in the Merrill collection, but in the Mayer collection are works by June Kaneko, and probably many of you know that June has gone on to create incredible dango forms. They're these triangular, rounded forms, and using extruded pipe to make tall pieces. Well, he really did get his start at Scripps. Well, in Southern California. He did go to the graduate school, but he came to California and intended to pursue painting. And because he didn't know the language, because he had no money, and because he met Fred Mayer almost the first day he was in the area, Fred took him under his wing, and June stayed at his house when he and his wife went to Europe for 3 months. And Fred's house was packed with ceramics. And so June was able to have these very personable encounters with clay, looking at them, handling them, studying them, putting them back, comparing them. And that was his beginning. And so now June is an artist of all media, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, but this really started in Scripps. And I just want to point out a few things about these pieces. That one on the upper right corner is a painting of the Scripps Ceramic Studio from about 1971. And it's a document as well as a piece of clay. And so it's really interesting to see that piece. When I met June Beck in, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, he had already had these great accomplishments. So to retrace and see these early pieces are quite remarkable. And the basket that's on that lower right is one of my favorite pieces. I hope you'll all will get a chance to see it. So most of these pieces are from the Merrill collection, the exception being the Marilyn Levine ceramic suitcase on the upper right. And Robert Arneson was a Benicia artist, born and raised in Benicia, and taught at UC Davis. And he went to UC Davis as a professor during a time when the art department was just beginning to be formed. And so there were many artists who came to UC Davis who were unconventional and industrious. And one of the other people who was there was Wayne Thiebaud was there at the time, and William Wiley. So there was a grouping of artists that were just so incredibly dynamic. And Arneson was there in the ceramic studio. And the ceramic studio was in a portable building, as so many art programs find themselves in, right? They get put in the portable building, the room that doesn't get used anymore. And well, this portable building had been the post office. It had been a few other things. But they said, well, you can share part of that building. And so Arneson says, okay, I'll take it. And eventually everyone else got pushed out. And it's called TB9, and TB is temporary building. Of course, it's been around for 70 years. So, but Annabeth Rosen now is the Robert Arneson Endowed Chair there, and she's gotten insulation. You know, it was beastly hot in the summer and freezing cold in the winter. And it's really embraced its legacy. But these early pieces are, these two figures are very early pieces of Arneson, who is still wayfinding in his work. And, you know, he became known for his kind of self-referential portraitures that were often political, but this is before that time. But there was a great legacy that happened with Arneson, and it's known as the funk movement. I mean, that makes it such an official thing. I don't think they ever intended to say, oh, let's do a movement, let's call it funk. That was not the case. But at UC Davis kind of had this irreverent attitude towards iconography, and some people think it was in response to kind of East Coast snobbery that felt that, oh, these Californians, they don't know how to build anything, and you know, weren't really following the rigid rules of ceramics. And of course, David Gahuli and then Marilyn Levine came to UC Davis specifically to study with Robert Arneson. Otto and Vivica Haino are very well represented in the Merrill collection. And the three pieces on the left show their adeptness as vessel makers, and they work together, and they Vivica would throw and Otto would design and that kind of thing. But in the show, there is this other wall piece. It's quite large, and I liked what this represents. It shows how Forrest is collecting the best of these artists, but he loves to find the odd piece that shows a completely different side to what they're doing. So themes in the show, when you go over, you'll see the variety of the vessel. You know, in the late mid-1940s, the vessel was still predominantly the language of clay, and it starts to evolve over time. You'll also see the embrace of figuration, even though there aren't really that many literal figures in the show, and you will also see a nice example of expressionist ceramics. And many of these pieces are just really wonderful to look at. And these are two of them by Ralph Becerra. And he studied with Vivica Haino at Chenard, and he's represented in the show by two pieces. And so that's why, in a sense, there's this robustness to the show, because I didn't want to just show one piece here of this artist and one piece there of that artist. That's not enough information for me, and I wanted to communicate that information to the people who visited the show. Becerra's bowl, a vessel, it's a double-walled vessel, and it's quite large. It's not something you'd put on your dining room table. It's quite large, and it has like this blue pool of color that you can see in there. And it shows several things that are indicative of Becerra's work and how he has a tendency to be ornate. He was inspired by Japanese Emari design, highly designed and quite busy surface. And often his pieces have a textile feel to them. And I also like the fact that even though it's a walled vessel and seemingly closed off, there's a lot of incision that's happening in the side. And he has this other form, it's called Animal, and it's one of two pieces that ideally go together. And that was one of the things that Forrest felt very strongly about, is that many of the pieces by artists he wanted to show more than one so they could have a dialogue, which I understand. It makes it complicated from a curatorial perspective, but it's actually a really interesting perception. So when you go into the gallery, you will see that there are figures represented on many of the pieces, and it starts with a Ken Price piece, this bowl, and it moves to Ruth Rippon. The abstraction figures of these pieces by Ken Price then move to a stylistic representation of a female form on a bottle, and she's starting to incise in the clay body. And then you have a highly stylized sculpture by the Northern California artist Kenneth Derrick. And you can see he's taking the vessel form and he's building them one on top of the other. And then you have this I love this piece, awesome piece by M.C. Richards, and M.C. stands for Mary Caroline. And she is a very interesting figure in the history of ceramics. She taught at Black Mountain College. She was from the West Coast, but she taught at Black Mountain College. And she was a poet, really, and a writer. She's known for her poetry and her writing, and produced a very influential book in 1964 called Centering in Pottery, Poetry, and the Person. And it explores the poetry of personhood and how the act of creativity is fulfillment. And this is a quote of her saying, "Centering is a verb," and of course centering is what a potter does with the clay on the potter's wheel. It's an ongoing process. Centering is not a model, but a way of balancing a spiritual resource in times of conflict and imagination. So this work is less about its form and more about its intent. And of course, expressionist ceramics really took hold in Southern California. Although it wasn't unique solely to Southern California, many Japanese artists were working on it as well. But here's a scope of pieces in the show that will show you that very energized, gestural technique that used the surface of the vessel, of the pot, of the form, as their canvas, so to speak. But I might also say that for some of these artists, the expressionist intent was also used in the building of the form or ripping away of the form. So that's something that you do see here in Southern California. Lastly, things to consider when you're in the exhibition is the California ceramic history. There's a lot happening there. We have works from 1930 to basically 2022. There are cross currents and narratives. There's history underlying some of the juxtapositions, and I'll talk about a few of those. And then there are some international perspectives that are in the collection. Both Fred Marer and Forrest Merrill did look beyond the United States for some other work. And Fred from Japan, because he went there to visit June, and Forrest from Northern Europe when he was there during World War II. As California is part of the global Pacific Rim, Japanese cultural influence has been present since the 19th century, and Merer's friendship with Kaneko is a part of that. But it even began before that 1963 relationship. And Shoji Hamada is here. I love this photograph. here at Scripps College, throwing on the wheel, and it's very hard to see, but I hope you'll make an effort. I'm going to walk over, and you'll just have to hear me. So he's throwing on the wheel, but he's sitting cross-legged in front of it, so it's not a kick wheel, and it's not an electric wheel. And it looks like a drumstick right here that he's holding, and he would take the wheel using that drumstick and kind of wind it up, and then when it got to a certain speed, he would then throw on the wheel. So that is a really interesting explanation as to what he's doing. He also did some, this beautiful platter by Forrest Merrill is molded. But this was, his presence at Scripps was not an accident. It was part of a specific tour of the United States that he did with the British artist Bernard Leach. And Bernard Leach lived in Japan, and he felt that the best and the most beautiful pots had an Asian history. And that was kind of a tough thing for American potters to swallow. He was controversial, and he would say that, you know, wonderful pottery always has a taproot of culture, and Americans don't have that, which was kind of rude. And many people thought he was rude because of that. But he had a very important role to play. He wrote the book called The Potter's Book in 1940. And he did talk about the ethical pot. There were certain qualities of a pot that were really, really important. And so he does still have a following. But here's Hamada. And they also were accompanied by the guy, what is his name? I'll get it. Oh, Suetsu Yanagi, who wrote The Unknown Craftsman. And that was glorifying the artist who would make pottery every day and not necessarily seek glory or prestige, and that his pots or her pots were the truest of pottery because they probably weren't perfect, but that made their essence even better. So because of June Kaneko's association with Fred and the whole idea of the California being on the Pacific Rim, there is a strong presence of Japanese ceramics in the Marer collection, which I chose to feature. Often when the Marer collection gets brought up for view in exhibitions, they're always kind of the standard ones that people expect to see. And I pulled some of those, but I didn't pull all of them. And I wanted to show this dynamic because I'm fascinated by that relationship between Fred and June. And June went on to curate a show with this piece here, the Roiji Koi. That was in the show as well. So he curated a show for Scripps for the annual, and that show then traveled. But cross currents also continue in Northern California, and I wanted to be sure to show this image of Ruth Rippon, and artist from California State University, Sacramento. She was a quiet leader in the ceramics realm of Northern California, especially Sacramento, where she was born and raised. She was a contemporary of Volkas and Arnis, and yet didn't seek the notoriety, though she certainly deserved it. She was both an accomplished potter and sculptor who could work in fine porcelain and stoneware, utilizing outstanding glazes. Her training was with Antonio Prieto at Mills College, and Prieto's piece is on the far right there. And that was both a blessing and a curse. She learned a lot from him, but she also had to kind of push against his influence to find her own voice. She established the ceramic studio at California State University, Sacramento, where she taught for nearly 35 years, usually as the only woman on the faculty. And she was both beloved and respected by her students and peers. And as we see in this picture of her at Sac State with Stephen Kaltenbach, Robert Arneson, Peter Vandenberg, and Jerry Wahlberg. And I just felt that that's a great photo, and you can tell by Ruth she had a great sense of humor. I didn't take a class from her, but I heard she was tough, but she was beloved. One of the other great cross-currents or stories of the show is this one. When I entered my room and saw a delicious chocolate cake, I rushed for a knife to cut a piece. How could you play such a miserable trick on me? Beatrice Wood wrote in a letter to David Gahuli. And Beatrice Wood lived to be over 100 years old. And especially in her age of 100, she was enamored with young men and chocolate. And so funk artist David Gahuli was enamored with her, as many people were, and made this frog-adorned chocolate cake for her birthday. And the frog is kind of his symbol. It's part of his funk heritage. And this addition to Forrest Merrill's collection, along with the cheeky thank you letter that Wood sent to Gahuli, captures the humanity of the artists, providing a personal context to their work. Tung Cheng's platter that we see in the center here is seemingly smeared with glazes, and it's an insightful homage to the legendary Northern California production potter Edith Heath and her impact on contemporary ceramics. Tung is the studio manager of Heath Ceramics Pottery in Sausalito, which was founded by Edith in the 1940s. She modernized ceramic design during the hardships of World War II, developing simplified forms and special matte glazing. You know, one of the things that she developed was normally with clay vessels, especially, you would have two firings. You would have the form with the dried clay, go in the kiln to get your bisqueware, and then you would glaze it. But because of the hardships of World War II and all of the expenses of electricity and everything, she devised a clay body and a glaze body where you just would do that once. And that was a big revelation. The glazes on Tung's piece are layered remnant scrapings from an old glaze booth used to make Heath products. And you can see I included an image of a variety of Heath glazes. He presses the geologically layered glaze onto the form, creating a unique surface while acknowledging Edith Heath's adaptive innovation. So this is the kind of story that I believe we need to keep telling, we need to keep finding, and we need to keep celebrating. I just want to point out a few pieces that warrant acknowledgement. There's a real historical context to this show, and we see that in the work of Herb Sanders and Glenn Lukens, two transformative artists who really helped to establish the tradition of fine art pottery in the United States. Herb Sanders was the first person in the U.S. to achieve a PhD in ceramics. You don't think about that often, but it's true, from Ohio State. And he came to California to teach at the ceramics department at San Jose State University. The influential educator Glenn Lukens, and of course, if you remember, Forrest collected his glass bowl as one of his first pieces, is represented in the Merrill collection by this large-scale crackled bowl which celebrates the use of truly natural materials Lukens probably harvested from nature. Really take a look at that if you go back to the show. And then there were the British practitioners Lucy Ree and Hans Koper, and remember Hans Koper had a piece at Kettle's Yard, and Jennifer Lee, who is still living. These are part of the broader context of exhibitions. We've looked back a lot at makers of the past, but Forrest Merrill, even at 92, is still collecting. And so here are present-day makers, Bill Geisinger, who's an expert at woodfire, Mark Gowdy, Chris Marabuyashi, and Catherine Hirsu. These are all people who live in the region of San Francisco where Forrest lives. But there's a future. What happens next? What's happening to these works? Where do they belong? And so these closing slides will discuss that briefly. Forrest L. Merrill, and he's very proud of that L, is still collecting. And that fantastic Henry Takamoto orb sculpture that's in the show was just recently purchased, and it was purchased specifically for this exhibition. His ceramic collection gains deeper meaning when viewed within the broader context of his entire collection, which includes textiles, glass, wood, and so much more. And here I've included two pieces by the artist Kei Sekamachi, who's from Northern California, who creates amazing pieces out of paper and linens and leaves and textiles. There was a major show of her work at the Berkeley Art Museum just a few years ago. And these all kind of interrelate and connect when you visit Forrest, because he has the ceramics and then he has textiles here and wood, and it's all this, the mind of Forrest Merrill, which is pretty exciting. And the thing about Forrest is he knows every piece, and he knows the context of every piece. And he'll tell this amazing story about how he either stumbled upon this work or he pursued that one. But it's really a remarkable archive of creativity. He is a true connoisseur, I would say that, and this combination of knowledge and passion has guided him over the years in developing extraordinary holdings. The Fred Mayer collection also has such a wonderful legacy, and this is a quote from Paul Soldner, who was crucial in facilitating the gift of Fred's 900 works of ceramics to the college. When Fred came to visit, he would ask a lot of questions. It wasn't all administration. He wanted to know the philosophical reasons for what we were doing. And so there's a great depth of meaning and thought to what Scripps has been able to acquire. And Paul Soldner, I think, was very crucial in making that connection and encouraging him, not hounding him. I know that other people hounded Fred for his collection, but he wasn't going to put his work in a place that wasn't accessible and living. I think that is the kind of undercurrent of the show and the undercurrent of both of these collections, that these are living collections, not possessions to be coveted and shuttered away. They're to be out and about and being a part of the college community, the public. And that's a pretty great gift. Paul Soldner was the backbone of the ceramics department at Scripps College for decades. He came to the college in 1956, and while the Ceramic Annual had existed before his arrival, Soldner's vitality elevated the exhibition to new heights. He curated it for 34 years and then sought out guest curators like me, who brought fresh perspectives to contemporary work in ceramic history. His unique expression of the Japanese fire process, called the American raku, slow temperature salt firing, is what Soldner took to new heights, and the piece that is in the center of our exhibition, I think, reflects that. It has been a privilege for me to be the guest curator for the 80th Scripps College Ceramic Annual, and I'm so grateful to everyone as part of the Williamson Gallery who were open to my ideas and so supportive of my efforts. It's a rare opportunity for a curator. Normally we have to really battle to make sure we can create an exhibition of content, meaning, and beauty. And I think the Ruth Chandler Williamson Gallery is an example of the best of what a university gallery can do. Give someone the opportunity to pursue an idea and support that idea. So thank you, Erin and Kirk back there, and T and John and Marguerite and Jan and many, many students. The students wrote many of the entries, the bios for the artists, and I want to thank all of the supporters who helped to realize this exhibition and the collection photographers. In closing, I do want to say that Scripps College is going to have some big shoes to fill when Kirk Delman retires at the end of this year. And so I feel that, Kirk needs a real round of applause for his 38 years as collection manager, and he's got so much history, so many stories. He's a true gem of Scripps College. And I think there are many here just by spending some time here. But thank you very much for this opportunity. And if you have questions, I'll field them informally.
Thank you so much for your presentation today. Give us a whole new perspective on all of the ceramics that I think we're all pretty excited to get over and see. So Nancy will be at the gallery and is willing to answer your questions or comments about the pieces in the show and about all the work that she has done. Make your way over to the Williamson Gallery. So thanks again for coming. See you at the gallery.